Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the weather warnings as we do have ice, rain and wind warnings issued for the next 48 hours. We'll have a look at the UKV, look at the precipitation, temperature and wind gusts over the course of the next 5 days, as it's remaining fairly unsettled and pretty stormy as we head into the new year. We'll then have a look at the longer range, look at the GFS, GEM, ECMWF and the ensembles, as that sort of unsettled, stormy sort of conditions does look likely to continue at least for the next week or so, perhaps even longer than that. There is a trend for it to turn slightly cooler in the longer term, or more consistently cooler, with a polar maritime air mass coming in from the northwest. So nothing amazingly cold, but it could mean more of the precipitation falling out of the skies wintry over higher ground and in the north, and it could have a general cool down on the feel-like temperatures, making it feel much more towards winter than at the moment. It's sort of been oscillating between very mild conditions and generally average conditions, so it could trend colder but remain very unsettled in the longer term. There is a sign perhaps from the GFS today of a Scandinavian high building in right in the longer range. Again, we'll have a look at that, but that is very much a minority option at this stage, but it could spice things up towards the second half of the month, where we are at the moment expecting high pressure to take more of an influence, potentially turning us colder, but of course that is longer range stuff and we'll have to see what happens with that over the course of the next few weeks. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now if you start on the live radar, you can see quite a few showers around. Most of the rain from this morning has cleared, maybe lingering a bit over northern Scotland. You can see those big weather fronts causing heavy snow across Norway now, especially over the higher ground, with a bit of rain to low-lying areas. It's accompanied by very mild air. Elsewhere, behind it, as I said, a lot of showers around. You can see where the wind is coming from, as these showers do line up with the southwesterly winds. So quite a mild air mass moving in at the moment, so temperatures could be quite warm out there, at least for the time of year, getting up to sort of 11 or 12 degrees over the course of the next day or so. Across Scotland, there still was a bit of cold air lingering. We did see quite a lot of heavy snow here last night into this morning, and of course we saw that amber rainfall warning issued to southern areas. That is now cleared, and that sort of snow risk has reduced, but it's still there over the higher ground, with that cold air getting shoved back out into the North Atlantic. Now, to put on the temperatures around 3 p.m, you can see in the south it's pretty mild. A lot of yellows around, indicating temperatures in around that sort of 10 or 12 degree range. Still across northern areas it is cold, but a little bit milder than it was this time yesterday, as that weather front has brought milder air for all, really. Now, if we do go on and have a look at the past 24-hour precipitation totals, again, these are radar estimates, so again, they're not the most accurate, but you can see how that amber rainfall warning across southern Scotland was warranted. You can see a lot of rain fell there, about 50-60 millimetres plus, and quite a lot of rain widely elsewhere across Northern Ireland, Scotland, and parts of the Republic of Ireland as well, so quite a big deluge. Again, we would be having more issues than we are at the moment if first half of December was very wet, but of course you remember it was very cold and it was actually really quite dry as well. Even though there was snow around for some, it was generally quite dry. So yes, a lot of rain falling at the moment, but it's not particularly wet out there, or the last month hasn't been particularly too wet, so it's not causing too many issues yet in terms of river flooding and things like that. Of course, we see these deluges continue over the course of the next couple of weeks, then those issues could take more precedence. So we'll have to keep an eye on those rainfall totals. Not a huge issue right now, but could become more of an issue over the course of the next few weeks. Now, if you put on the weather warnings, you can see we've got 2 warnings issued today, or issued now. We did have warnings earlier, but they now have expired. We have an ice warning from 9 p.m. tonight until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Again, that cold air is still lingering over Scotland. Not quite cold enough in the day to keep snow around, but it's cold enough at night to drop those temperatures down below freezing and ice to form where we have that wintriness around. So where we've seen rain, sleet or snow over the past 24 hours and it's still wet on the ground, it's likely to freeze tonight and could cause some issues. High likelihood, lower end of the impact, temperatures will fall away and icy patches are likely to develop this evening and overnight on any untreated surface. surfaces. Snow showers will also affect the far north and northwest of Scotland, giving a few centimetres in places, mainly higher ground. So actually that cold air is going to wrap back in tomorrow, bringing those wintry showers. As we'll see in the long range in the second half of the video, that cold air never really goes far away from northern Scotland, so always going to have that risk there. Again, that's pretty standard for this time of year, but it does mean there's going to be very much on and off wintry hazards. If we look at, we've got a wind warning issued. I have said for the last few days I was expecting wind warnings to be issued. We hadn't seen many, or any at all, but we do now have one issued until 3 AM tomorrow from 6 PM this evening. So actually starting when most people will be watching this video. Gusts of 60 to 70 miles per hour are likely around the coast or over higher ground, high likelihood lower under the impact. And if we go to tomorrow, we've got those ice and wind warnings. We also have a rain warning across southern and southwestern parts of England and parts of Wales from midnight tonight until 9 PM tomorrow. Again, big deluge of rain coming in, perhaps as much as 10 millimetres in an hour and probably more in other areas, but again, no exact rainfall totals here. It's going to be the intensity, it's going to be the big issue. Surface water flooding is the most likely problem. No river flooding at this stage. As I said, generally been quite a dry month, or at least the first half was. Therefore, rivers and lakes are not overflowing, even though if we had this sort of deluge for the past few weeks and past month, then perhaps. But yeah, given we've had quite a dry start to December, dry first 2 weeks, it's meant that this sort of rainfall could cause surface water flooding here, with ground saturated, but not too much sort of widespread river flooding. But as I said, that could be an issue over the coming weeks. High likelihood, lower end of the impact matrix. Now, if you go to the UKV and look at the precipitation and the temperature and wind gusts over the course of the next 5 days, you can see all that rain heading through this morning. Line convection across parts of Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland that did sweep eastwards and eventually clear. And again, it did move that exceptionally heavy rain through parts of southern Scotland. Again, amber warning was issued there. But by lunchtime, most of the rain had cleared for many areas, and we're into a much milder air mass, a bit of wintriness over Scotland, but nothing too much for you this afternoon. Over the course of this evening, cold air will wrap back in through Scotland. You can see more snow falling in areas there. Again, quite showery, not really too persistent, but again, ice warning issued, so could be some wintry hazards there. Elsewhere, showers are starting to push in from the southwest, and that's just signs of what's coming tomorrow. By around midnight, the heavy rain is arriving, and into the morning it will spread in. Hopefully the heaviest bursts will head in overnight, and that's why we've got that warning issued for southwestern parts. But still, as many people awake in the morning into lunchtime, there still will be more batches of heavy rain moving up from the south. Again, they'll move through very quickly on the southwesterly wind, but where they do occur, could be some really torrential rain for a time. Beyond that, through Saturday afternoon, the last day of 2022, it's going to be quite horrible out there. Very cloudy, quite gusty in terms of the winds, and look at that, a lot of rain around. Again, some areas will be dry, but even when you're dry, it's most likely going to be cloudy and gloomy with patches of drizzle around, and then if you're under the rain, it's just going to be quite horrible and miserable out there. So not a particularly pleasant day to end 2022. A bit of wintriness over Scotland, but again, yeah, not too great. As we head into the first day of 2023, rainfall spreads north through New Year's Eve and into New Year's Day. If you get out doing fireworks or anything like that around midnight, areas in the south could actually be quite decent. Does look like there'll be some breaks in the cloud. Might not be too bad. Same for northern Scotland, but through the central belt of Scotland, perhaps some snow or rain, and then through Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Wales, and northern England. Yeah, a big batch of heavy rain. Now again, the northern and southern extent of this could shift subtly, so it could change over the course of the next 2 days or so, but this is the rough position. So if you are in these areas and you are planning to do anything on New Year's Eve as we head into the new year, it does not look particularly great. Now, as we head through the morning, that rain will head northwards, turning to snow over the high ground of Scotland. So if you are over the Scottish hills, you could be waking up on New Year's Day to quite a lot of snow in places, and then there'll just be a lot of heavy showers around. But by the afternoon, if you are planning to get out for a walk on New Year's Day, on Sunday, it actually looks pretty dry. Those showers and areas of rain and snow will decrease. As we head into the 2nd of January, of course, still a bank holiday. You can actually see it's a pretty dry day. It's like, could be quite a good day if you are planning to get out and about as we do head into the new year. Bit of rain perhaps in the southeast. That could come more onshore. Again, we'll have to see. Hopefully it doesn't drift away so we can see some clearer skies there, because there are some areas that hardly see the sun over the course of the last week or so. But it should be a decent day elsewhere, and into the 3rd of January it could give some very heavy rain through the mid-afternoon. Again, either side of it shouldn't be too bad, but yeah, rain heading in, and then more batches of heavy rain and thundery showers pushing in next week. Again, could impact the north more, but again, it's 5 days away, so things are still uncertain. Field on the wind gusts you'll be able to see is quite gusty out there, regardless of whether they've got wind warnings issued or not. You can see earlier this morning 50, 60 or even 70 mile per hour wind gusts were seen, and over the course of this evening you can see those stronger wind gusts through Scotland once again. 60 or 70 miles per hour, yellow warning issued for that. But elsewhere there still will be strong gusts, 30, 40, maybe 50 miles per hour quite widely in places, especially towards coastal areas, and even in the south through New Year's Eve. It could be really quite gusty if you're out there. Again, could be some hazards with fireworks. Again, gusty winds, things like that could blow things over. And again, please do be safe out there. Again, it could seem very calm, and then a 40 mile per hour gust could come through and cause some issues. So please do take the necessary precautions out there, and if it is too windy, do things like fireworks or be outside and doing anything like that, please do listen to the necessary advice and precautions. But yeah, it could be quite gusty through New Year's Eve as we head into the new year, but those winds should die down for a time through Sunday afternoon. So actually for New Year's Day afternoon it shouldn't be too bad. It's mainly overnight New Year's Eve into the morning, and then as we head into next week it's actually briefly a little bit sort of less gusty. Bit of ridge of a higher pressure there early next week, but then the gusty conditions return from the west, and very unsettled conditions. You can see there 40, 50, 60 miles per hour quite widely. Again, I expect these to be a little bit more localised near the time. We'll have to look at that, as I said, next week. If you do put on the max temperatures, as you can see today, it's relatively mild in the south, around 11 or 12 degrees. Further northwards, a few degrees above freezing, but still relatively cold, so a bit of wind shear over the high ground and could be to low-lying areas tonight. As we head into Saturday, the last day of the year, you can see afternoon temperatures in the south and southeast are 10 to 12 degrees, quite mild, a few degrees at least above average, and you can see across Scotland actually quite cold, quite a big temperature contrast there, so quite a freezing end to the year across Scotland. Again, not too unusual to see this sort of cold conditions, a couple of degrees below average though, and it could be some winteriness associated with that. For midnight, as we head into New Year's Day, if you are out doing fireworks, as I said, it's going to be quite mild in the south and the east, gusty but mild. Further northwards, through northern England, Scotland, Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's going to be a lot colder, low single digits, if not below freezing, especially over Scotland, and quite widely below freezing, so it could be quite a cold day there. As we head into New Year's Day afternoon, you can see that it's going to be widely sort of average conditions for the north, mid-single digits. For the south and eastwards, more towards 10 or 11, so slightly above average, but again, nothing too out of the ordinary. For Monday night, for Sunday night into Monday, quite cold in the north and the west especially. Southeast still hanging on to 6 or 7 degrees, as we do see quite a widespread frost. Again, it's one of these transient air masses that's lingering towards our north, but spreads through for a time on Monday, and under the higher pressure it allows those temperatures to absolutely plummet, because of course January is generally our coldest month of the year. We've still got very slow solar radiation, and the air masses to our north are very cold, so it's sort of the recipe for the coldest weather of the year. So whenever we do see some higher pressure, some clearer skies, and a generally cold air mass, we are going to see those temperatures plummet. So even though it's not particularly exceptional air mass through Monday, widely those temperatures overnight down towards sort of -1 to -5 degrees, so really quite cold. And into Monday afternoon, widely chilly day, quite a wintry feel out there, 4 to 6 degrees, even colder further northwards, but again, I must emphasise it's a transient air mass. As we head into Tuesday, a frost overnight quite widely from around the Midlands northwards, but by Tuesday afternoon, those temperatures recovering again, perhaps 10 degrees in the south, still cold in the north, but look at that big mild wedge of air moving in on Wednesday. So yes, slightly colder through New Year's Day to around the 2nd or 3rd of January. But again, it's a transient air mass getting trapped under higher pressure, so we're seeing colder conditions for a time, but again, nothing out of the ordinary for winter. Now, if we do go over to the GFS and see what that's showing over the course of the next few weeks, again, big strong westerly flow at the moment, remaining very unsettled, and yeah, looking quite horrible indeed. A lot of these westerly winds coming in. You can see that brief ridge of high pressure early next week. That's why it's briefly colder and drier. But look at the return of those westerlies next week. Big lows arriving out of northern Canada and Greenland, giving us a very cold northwesterly flow, but very unsettled as well. The polar maritime air mass, quite cold upper air temperatures, but of course towards the surface, travelling such a long sea track, it's going to pick up quite a lot of moisture. Those dew points will be above freezing, so it'll be one of those conditions where it's sort of 3 or 4 degrees, cold rain, bit of sleet mixing in perhaps, bit of growlpool maybe, and then snow over the higher ground, maybe a bit of evaporative cooling, but that's as well in the longer term. So cool, if not even a little bit cold, but unsettled and probably not particularly wintry in terms of that as well. And since the longer term, we stay pretty cold generally, but nothing exceptionally cold, hovering around that -5 area, but again coming from North Atlantic, so it is very much altered at the surface and moderated. But as I said, the GFS was doing something quite interesting, building a Scandinavian high, staying very unsettled though in the meantime, and right towards the end, towards the middle of January, Scandinavian high building, trying to push in an easterly wind. That would be very cold, but look at all these purples towards Greenland and northern Canada and Iceland, just trying to push very unsettled westerly winds. Look at that temperature contrast there. That would need some Scandinavian high to hold that off. So again, unlikely to see us come off if the tropospheric polar vortex stays as strong as it's looking there across parts of North America and Greenland. So we'll have to see what happens, but majority of the GFS run was quite cold and unsettled and northwesterly sort of pattern. But then a brief ridge of high pressure towards Scandinavia that could pull colder air in for a time. But looking at this, I don't think it would last at all. If we look at the GM, see how that does compare. Again, very westerly at the moment. We see that brief ridge of high pressure early next week, but it's very much transient before we see those westerly conditions come back in. For a time next week, it looks mainly in the north, those westerly conditions, but right towards day 10, look at that. A much cooler northwesterly flow. Low pressure is actually driving slightly further southwards, getting very cold air feeding into it, but very mild air feeding into the other side, and it could really spin up these lows, and again, name storm potential with these. Again, it's sort of touch and go whether these do go through rapid deepening, and again, we'll have to see it nearer the time, but yeah, very, very unsettled. No sign of anything blocked or cold here, even though that is the signal for the second half of January. Just very unsettled. Tropospheric polar vortex sat over Iceland, Greenland and northern Canada, just fueling these huge low pressure systems out in the North Atlantic. Now the eastern OF is even more typical with that as well. A westerly flow pushing in at the moment, a brief ridge of high pressure early next week, and then look at that westerly wind to continue to push in, and just look at that really cool northwesterly wind of air originated from northern Canada, Greenland, where it's -20, -30, but across such a long sea track, it does get altered significantly. You can see it's -20, -15 upper air temperatures exiting northern Canada, but getting moderated down towards around freezing at 850 HPA by the time it reaches the UK. So it's a cold air mass originating from a very cold place, but in the end, it's not particularly cold. For the UK, it'll be below average, but nothing exceptional, just really unsettled and stormy, and you can just see this huge low of low pressure, 980 millibars there towards the centre, and I would expect small lows to be developing here. You can even see one developing on the jet stream just here that just get dragged along, and that's where we could see some really stormy conditions. Again, it is sort of day 7 to day 10 stuff, but there's real potential here for seeing some very unsettled and stormy conditions, quite cold as well, and again, that could bring the risk of very significant snow and wintry conditions, blizzards, things like that, over higher ground in the north, but maybe not exclusively if we did see some cold air dig in. We could see a pattern to what we saw similar late January 2019, where we actually saw quite a lot of heavy snow around, and that was from a similar pattern like this, where that cold air sort of got embedded over the top of us, a northwesterly wind for a good few days, if not a week, and then seeing any little lows run into that, then we could see some snow. So there could be a route to colder weather here, not a traditional block or anything, but if we saw this northwesterly wind persist, it It could go quite cold in the longer term, could be quite wintry, especially over higher ground, but a low chance it could return to low-lying areas as well for a time if we saw this pattern embed. But given the longer-term pattern, and given what we have seen, I do think this would be very much like a couple days of cold polar maritime air mass. You can see it's well reflected on the ensembles. You can see very much up and down over the course of the next few weeks. In the longer term, generally average to maybe slightly below average from quite a few ensemble members. But I do expect it to be oscillating quite a bit, especially for London being closer to those warmer cores of the lower pressure. You would expect to see. Generally us oscillating between above average and below average. You can see that for the next week or so before it becomes a little bit modelled with the timings. But again, no significant cold, nothing down to sort of -10. A couple runs here or there getting close to that. Again, those will be with more of a direct northerly, a bit more ridging at the inland in the Atlantic, but majority have just a general northwesterly flow, keeping us very unsettled. Again, if we look at the ECMWF, again, very similar. Up and down over the course of next week, trending towards average, if not slightly below average in the longer term. Again, that sort of northwesterly air mass, a few degrees below average, nothing ridiculously cold, but will be cool, unsettled, stormy, and potentially wintry in the north. So yeah, longer term, proper polar maritime air mass could be returning, or could arrive really, from the northwest. Nothing ridiculously cold, but from this sort of westerly regime with very little blocking, it's sort of the coldest conditions you can really see. It will probably be quite stormy up until then and during that as well. So yeah, if you want any dry conditions, not looking likely over the course of the next few weeks. Could be a couple of days here or there, like early next week, but most of the time it's going to be quite unsettled, perhaps quite stormy, perhaps trending colder as well in the longer term. So anyway, thanks for watching. Make sure you stay safe out there, especially towards this weekend. Strong gusts around, some heavy batches of rain as well. So we are out celebrating the new year with fireworks and things like that. Make sure you do stay safe out there. And I'll see you again for another video soon.